welcome to the People Playbook podcast. Today's guest is George Croft, a senior advisor at First Key Consulting and a non-executive board member at Brewdog. George began his long career at Labatt, laying out the foundation for a remarkable leadership journey in the beverage industry. He went on to serve 15 years as CEO of Waterloo Brewing, where he transformed that company into a national player, while serving nearly a decade as the chair of Beer Canada, champion industry-wide advocacy. Now at First Key, George advises beverage clients on driving sustainable growth and operational clarity, while at Brewdog, he helps balance bold innovation with strong governance. His leadership is defined by aligning vision and execution, creating value that's both enduring and forward-thinking. George, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks very much, Jason. My pleasure to be on the podcast today.
It's nice when you hear an intro like that. You probably know what you've done all your life, but then you think, hey, that's a pretty cool intro. I've accomplished some things in my life.
Yeah, I think I've been very fortunate. I've also, had great mentors along the way, which I think, in terms of the learning and developing is critically important. I would say the other thing, though, that I've been a lifelong learner, and I encourage people to do that. I think, probably the most dangerous spot for leaders generally is the day that you sort of think that you've arrived. And my view would be it's a journey, it's not a destination. And you can always learn new stuff either by reading, listening to podcasts, or interacting with folks that have actually been there, done that.
Yeah. What a great segue to the first question I want to ask you. So if you look back at, when you started your career, did you ever imagine it would take you where it did?
I think the honest answer is probably no. I was born and raised in Edmonton, Alberta. I was lucky enough to have my first job at Labatt as a summer student. And that, quite honestly, happened by accident. The fitness center that I was working at turned out to be going broke. And one of the guys that worked out there happened to work at Labatt. And I just asked him if there'd be an opportunity. And I think, the one thing you do recognize, especially if you come from humble beginnings, is I never took the brewery or the people for granted. I was always really appreciative of what I had there and the opportunity that the company presented to me. And so I enjoyed every single day that I was at Labatt, and certainly I've enjoyed my time in beverage alcohol at my other stops as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I always talk about leadership and how it is a journey, right? And if I had to say, hey, George, how were you as a leader when you started, and how has that changed along the way? If you look at from when you first started managing people and leading a team to, let's be honest, small groups probably, to big, large corporations and large companies. How did that evolution change?
Yeah, I think, early on, I would have had all of the opportunities to learn from, frankly, mistakes that I made. Right. I would say probably the two early learnings that I would have had. One was when I first got started in terms of leading people. My backdrop was I was actually busy looking for and trying to recruit people that were like me. And that turned out to be, an error. Like the real opportunity was to find people that had complementary skills that didn't think like me. That insight allowed us to make better decisions. Mm-hmm. And then I think, early on in my career, early on in my career, I for sure landed on it's all about the people. It's people, people, people. And so if you, want to be successful, you have to surround yourself with great people. And if you do that, the probability of you obviously being promoted, but the business actually winning is significantly enhanced. So I've always been a big fan of people. I try to recruit people that I've had the opportunity to meet and come across. I don't like surprises, but that is the backdrop. I mean, if that was, if there was a single message today, it would be, it's all about the right people.
Yeah, absolutely. I've had the privilege of working with you, and if I describe one of my favorite things about you was that you're a straight shooter. Okay, you tell it like it is, which is refreshing, because I don't think that's always a common trait in leaders. Where do you think that came from as a leader? And this is a two-part question. How has it helped you or hurt you along the way in your journey?
Yeah, so I think, lots of learning Fortunately, I was lucky enough to play really competitive hockey, and I would say along the way, I learned a lot of leadership skills. They're not exactly the same. Obviously, they need to be refined and built upon. I grew up in a household that there was no room for, you needed to tell your parents about the good, and you need to tell your parents about the bad. And so, I always grew up from a perspective that just said you got to be honest. Got to be honest. You got to be respectful, and you need to be a good listener. I think we did have the opportunity to work together. I used to say this, I used to say, as long as people respect me, they don't necessarily have to like me. Certainly it was nice when people liked you, but respect was really the important puzzle, which was they respected me, I respected them. We could have difficult conversations. We'd land on a position. We may not completely agree, but then we'd execute the plan. All right. And I think, the last part of that obviously was just that burning persistence and desire to win. Like losing is easy and creating excuses to lose is easy. I mean, winning is difficult, but there's no better feeling. Like there's no better feeling. And when you have it and you've worked in that environment or you've been lucky enough to work in that environment, you really recognize the significance it has, both when you're doing the job, but actually when you leave the job. I think as you do what I'm now doing, you figure out that every place isn't quite like the places that we've had the opportunity to work at.
And I say there's high performing teams and there's also high achieving teams. Two are totally different, right?
Yeah.
So high performing team, I got a lot of great players on my team. Everybody can do a job. They're individually great at what they do. But when we get to a high achieving team, there's all those players that play roles along the way that just make us win. And it's funny when you look at winning, how many teams don't actually win, right? And I know that you're huge on winning. And I actually, when I talk about high achieving teams, I think of the Florida Panthers, right? You don't look at that team and say, here's the ultimate star in hockey. You look at that team and think, wow, everybody on that team just grinded it out to get to the end game, right?
That's it. For me, I love the word persistence. I would just say never giving up, never giving up, never giving up. It was a deal breaker for me, especially with my senior executives. I would have moved off of executives that suggested or hinted that we should just call it a day on this year, start to look at next year. It just never was part of my DNA. I often used to say, look, we didn't necessarily win in a very pretty fashion all the time. But, if you take an example, if I could use an example, I use the Waterloo Brewing Company example. I was there 15 years. Out of 15 years, we got full bonus 14. 14. It's easy to say, tough to do, but when you get people that are committed to it, and Florida Panthers is a perfect example, it creates a unique culture like none other. And I also believe the fault in this as well. I really believe when things are going well as a leader, you give all the credit. You give all the credit to your employees and your peers. And when things are not going well, you take all the blame, right? Good leaders do that. They own it when it's not good, and they give it away when it's really great.
Yeah, I love that. George, when you're making a big decision, do you tend to go with your gut, the numbers, or people? Or I know it might be a combination, but what do you weigh heavy on? Gut, people, or numbers when you're making a big decision?
Yeah, I'll get to your question. I'm just going to back it up just one sec, if I might. I think for me, what's really important is that there's a clear strategic vision for the organization. I think for me, Jason, often people think that has to be crazy complicated. And we've worked together, so I don't like complicated.
Yeah.
But, I think one of the things that really worked for us at Waterloo Brewing Company was, our strategic plan was fix, fill, optimization. That was our plan. And there were lots behind that. But, people could understand the chapters and they could understand exactly what we were trying to do.
Mm-hmm.
And so, when you get to your question, I would say it's a combination of all of the above. I think you've got to obviously go get data to support the facts or go get data to be able to evaluate different options. I think what happens lots of times in organizations, though, is they get stalled, right? They get paralyzed by, incoming data. And so for me, it's about getting the facts, making a decision, and then executing like crazy, right? And I'm quite okay with, sort of this 80% right. I think, trying to get the last 20%, is time consuming, and often you miss the opportunity.
Yeah, absolutely. There's so many missed opportunities by waiting a little too long as opposed to just going out and doing it, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think for me, it's always been about being able to build trusting, respectful relationships with all stakeholders,
Yeah.
employees, customers, banks, boards.
Yeah.
Well, for me, it's about, with my board, I shared the good, obviously, but if we had challenges, I didn't skirt around those with the board. I was honest up front, and I always, came with a plan, which was we need to do this, but I didn't sugarcoat that we had some challenges in front of us. And I think when you start to do that, you develop really different relationships with, folks generally.
I actually think that's why you've established so much trust in the organizations you've worked for or with, because you do. You're very transparent as a leader and lead with the, hey, this is what I love about the organization or the person or the situation. But hey, here's the stuff you need to hear as well, right?
Yeah, you asked me earlier. I never really answered it. You asked me earlier, do you think it helped me or hurt me? I think the honest answer for me is it probably helped me. But, I also know there's organizations where, that style probably doesn't fit. But the important thing for me would be if that's the case, then I don't fit. Right. So, I'm not going to compromise my style to fit into an organization that doesn't share those values. And it doesn't necessarily mean I'm right and they're wrong. But I think if the values are not aligned with your values and the way you behave and operate, then the company's probably not right for you. And frankly, it's probably best that you move on for yourself, and probably best that you move on for them.
For sure, for sure. George, can you tell me or share a time when you prioritized people over profit, and if that ended up being the smartest business move you made?
I'd probably start with it. I think you can do both.
Okay.
Right. So I don't think it necessarily is profit over people. I had to make some really tough calls on people when business wasn't healthy. And that's always difficult. Right. But, I think the backdrop was you're always looking for the folks that can help you move the organization along. I have, and I know, I have worked for a company where it was all about profitability
Oh yeah, yeah,
versus people. And ultimately, I ended up leaving there because, I didn't agree with that. And I certainly didn't agree with the approach that was being taken. So, again, I think it just has, you line up against values, but I don't think they're at odds, to be quite candid. I think, profitability, I used to say to people internally, but profitability is a good thing. It allows us to reinvest in people. It allows us to reinvest in infrastructure. So, this notion that profitability is a bad thing. I mean, my view would be it's the engine that allows you to continue to grow the organization, including your people.
I agree. George, you've been a good builder of people, and what I mean by that is you've been able to build some great teams and have some great people around you. How do you spot talent early? Because you've taken a lot of people young in their career and kind of seen something in them that you said, I want to nurture that and I want that to grow. So what traits do you look for? How do you spot that talent, and what traits are you looking for when you're looking at a person?
Yeah, well, we've talked about a couple of them already. So, I mean, I will be repetitive for sure. The spirit of winning, not giving up, being persistent. It's a big idea. It's a big idea. And again, it's about what you do versus what you say. So that for me is a big important puzzle. I would say one of the things that I think perhaps you can learn a little bit along the way, but I think it's a really, really difficult trait to develop is emotional intelligence, right?
Yeah.
So I think people either kind of have it or they don't have it. And I think people can obviously progress, but I think, emotional intelligence is important. The question for me is, how do people behave when things are not perfect, right?
Yeah.
It's easy to be positive and upbeat when things are really, really good. But what's it like when they're not? How do you behave? How do you act? Do you stay focused and stay in the moment, or do you start to blame others, right?
Yeah.
And I think the last piece for me, Jason, is good people attract good people. It's like, we're back to the Florida Panthers. We got to stop talking about the Florida
Yeah,
Panthers
no, I love it. Yeah, for sure.
because they got all this Maple Leaf stuff in the background. But I think, I think that's it, right? It's, because it's like a bit of a flywheel, because when you have that sort of culture, people you're bringing in, they will gravitate to that, right? That's because that's the way the place operates. And so I think it's really powerful. And I do think it helps you along the way.
Yeah, it's you said something there that resonated with me, and another leader once said it to me too. It's when somebody's not watching, what is that person doing, right? So when there's
Yeah,
no eyes on you, how are they acting? How are they behaving? And are they doing the right things when really nobody's watching? That's true definition of who do you have on your team and what are they doing, right?
yeah, that's it. That's it. I mean, here's an easy example, right? Expense accounts, right?
Perfect.
Some
Yeah.
people can't manage them. Some people are out of control. And for me, that's just a deal breaker because the fact of the matter is, here was the advice that I got from my first manager. That he was a simple guy and like I loved him a lot. He just said to me, I said, so what about expense accounts? How do I do that? He said, George, just treat the money as if it's yours,
Yep. Yep.
right?
Absolutely.
And it was, there's lots of advice these days and there's different programs these days, but it was that simple, right? And so I think it's just that notion that says, am I going to treat Jason the way I'd like to be treated? If the answer is yes, then I think that works. And I don't think there's any shortcut for caring, right?
Yeah,
And
I
when
agree.
I say that, people know that you care, like really care. You would have my back if things weren't great. And so when you get that kind of relationship with people, right? They care for you, you care for them. You can do magical things.
Absolutely. What do you think is one of the things that people get wrong about leadership?
I think it's aspirational, and I don't think it's for everybody. It is certainly, I would say, a different skill set if you're just looking after and managing yourself than managing people,
Yeah, it's hard managing people.
hard managing people. And you got to make some tough calls. And I think when you get to the spot where you've got to make tough calls, you realize that, the pace at which you make them is critically important because everybody else is watching. I don't know this to be a truth, although, when I think something's true, it kind of becomes a truth. But there is a bit of a ratio, at least in my experience, right? And it's kind of 1 in 10.
Yeah,
I mean, I wish it was different, but it kind of is. If you got I think about my days at, running Labatt, Ontario. We had 1,600 employees. I had 160 employee problems, thereabouts, at any
yeah,
given time, right? I got 20 people, I've got two. And it's not a universal truth, but you got to deal with them. And I think, the tough part of leadership is lots of people would prefer that they would just magically go away and they don't. And so you got to be able to deal with that stuff. And it changes, Jason. I would say it changes. I would say, once you get to sort of that president CEO role, it's more lonely for sure. You can't regularly be reaching out to people and say, geez, I got this problem because, people will lose confidence in your skill set to lead an organization. But, you look at the numbers, right? 1/3 to 1/2 of CEOs are displaced within the first 18 months in the job.
yeah. It's great, and I find that that could be because a lot of CEOs, when they're first becoming a CEO or a president, they have troubles having a direct conversation, right? Because
Yeah.
direct conversations sometimes they're uncomfortable, right? And
Yeah.
they have trouble saying, "Hey, I'm going to have to deliver a tough message," and it doesn't mean I like you any less. It doesn't mean that I don't think you're great on the team, but sometimes there's some things you do that we have to have those conversations about, right?
Yeah. You got to be a good communicator, right? And for me, that's not about just talking. That's more about listening, quite candidly. I don't think you can have a senior job and sit in your office and close your door. I don't believe that. I
Hmm.
think you've got to be out and about. I think you got to get to know people. If you think about Waterloo Brewing Company as an example, we had, 150 people thereabouts. I would have known everybody. We communicated with all of our staff, including the hourly employees quarterly. And I used to say to people, you and me, we're on the same team,
Yeah,
right? And
yeah,
I'm looking for you to play, your role to the very best of your ability. That's what I expect of you. What should you expect of me? You should expect exactly the same of me. And if I'm not, you should say something. Now, people don't, right? But the comment was sincere, right? So yeah, I had a different role to play. Yeah, it's about that accountability. And I think a lot of leaders, they believe that what they say is the most important thing. And I would argue that what you say is important. Way, 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 way more important is what you do, how you behave, what you do. People are watching you all the time. And if
yeah.
you have inconsistencies, then you become a hypocrite. And when you become a hypocrite, forget about it.
Yeah. People don't always remember what you say, but they remember how you made them feel. And they remember the conversation just on your body language, on what you did, and
Yeah.
how you acted. And you said something earlier in the conversation is not just a leader when you're in good times. In good times, it's pretty easy to be a leader, right? It's the hard times that you really see true leadership values in how somebody leads when they're dealing with, a crisis or something that you're just like, hey, you know what? This is going to be a bit of a dogfight, but let's get through
Yeah.
this together, right?
Yeah. Yeah. That's completely true. Right. I think when you're in those situations, the important thing is you got to figure out, and they got to be legitimate, but you have to figure out how to celebrate small wins along the way. If you're waiting for the finish line, you're just going to lose people. Right. And I think we've all had those.
Sure.
And they're interesting assignments. Like, I loved those assignments where you were going in and it needed to be fixed. I mean, I had one assignment where probably made me the most uncomfortable in my career, which would have been the old specialty beer company coming in, after the successful start of that business. I was the sort of second president of that company. And I thought to myself before I went in, like, what's going to be my legacy? And, I landed on more of what, Luke and the others had done as the chapter one. But, what I wanted to be able to do is continue that, but turn that business unit into a significant contributor financially to the Labatt Brewers of Canada. But I think it's a little bit of that. It's kind of like before you get started, you kind of need to have a couple of quiet moments to say, okay, what do I really want to accomplish?
Yeah. Yeah, that drive in your car to the brewery where you're just thinking, okay, what going into something here, like what do I have to accomplish here, and what am I hoping to get out of this, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
no, it's real for sure. If you do the Water Brewing Company story, if you did that quickly, right? So, when we got started, that first 6 months of the first year that I was there, I mean, we had negative EBITDA of $7.5 million. So we
Wow.
were in big trouble. We were in special loans, but the organization didn't know it. Like if you walked around the place, people thought we were doing just fine and we were winning. I remember meeting with the bank, and after we left the meeting with the bank, I actually called the bankers up and I had to go back by myself to say, no, it's way worse than what we were just telling you, right?
Wow.
And
Wow.
but then you say, okay, so now what? Am I going to give up and woe is me, or are you going to have a plan and try to get the support that you needed? And I was lucky. People said, how much is luck and how much is skill? And I don't know the answer to that. All I know is that in my career, the harder I worked, the luckier I got.
Yeah,
That kind of was the way it worked.
for sure.
And I was very fortunate to have a good board, and I was again transparent with them. They recognized the problems, and I just said, the biggest issue we've got is going to be time. I need you guys to agree to the plan or support the plan. And then I need you to get out of my way because I got to go as fast as I can to save this company. And we were lucky. And I surrounded myself with great people. And, we ended up selling the company for, $221 million to Carlsberg Group. It was great. And a whole bunch of people had their fingerprints all over it. And you talked about leadership. What kind of gets you most excited? I would say, particularly as you start to get a little bit older and more mature, the thing that makes me most excited is watching young folks that I've worked with to become very successful. You're a prime example of that. It genuinely makes me really proud that I can think I perhaps had a little bit to do with that.
Yeah, you absolutely did, George. You absolutely did. I was speaking to our producer ahead of time, and you were by far the best people leader I've ever had. I never had to wonder what you were expecting. I knew right away what you were expecting. And I think as people that have leaders, or when we're leading people ourselves, I think clarity is so essential. I don't think people want to be going out and thinking, I wonder what he wants me to do or she wants me to do, or guessing along the way. I think people just say, hey, you know what? Here's a clear direction where I need to go, and here's some steps I need to do, and now take it upon myself to actually make sure that gets done.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And there's lots of companies not doing it, right? I always say strategy is about, probably answering three questions. Where are we now? Where are we going? And how are we going to get there? And I always say to companies I'm working with now, strategy is about as much about what are we going to do as it is about what we're not going to do, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Because I think we can get caught up, and I think focusing in on what are the 2 or 3 or 4 or 5, no more than 5, things that are really going to make a difference to the company. and then putting your head down, getting through them. And once you're through them, you can select some more items. This laundry list of, boy, the list is this long. It just, from my perspective, it doesn't work. I think you really got to get focused in on, okay, what do we got to get accomplished? Everybody agrees. Put your head down, get it done, and then we'll add to the list. I had a great boss, now a good friend. I think you know who I'm talking about.
Yep.
God bless him. He was an adder, and I thought, oh, how do I get this sorted out, right? And so, one day when we were meeting, and all the stuff that he wanted added to the list was all really, really good stuff because he's a very smart guy. I just asked him the question. So, what would you like me to stop doing?
Yeah.
And that was it. We never had to have that conversation again. Yeah, Jason, I was blessed. I mean, seriously blessed with great leadership examples throughout my career. Through sport and throughout my career. And I would say, I owe a lot to a lot of people along the way. Seriously.
Yeah, and it establishes who you are as a leader, because when I talk about leadership, I always say you'll always remember your best leaders. Unfortunately, you'll always remember the worst as well.
Yep.
And there's those times where you look at a leader and you think, I look at it as, okay, that's something I'm not going to do. And I think just in life, we're all going to have a bit of both. Hopefully we have more great leaders than bad leaders, because I believe it's a privilege to lead people. Just like even when you're playing hockey as a kid or whatnot, you're not going to like every coach you have, right? But what are you going to take from that coach? What are you going to take from that leader? And just think, okay, I'm going to add that to my tool belt, or I'm going to actually take that one out, right? So you can actually determine what your leadership style is going to be.
I had a book when I was a summer student. This probably won't surprise you. I had a book, and I had at the front part of the book was good and replicate and rip off, and the back was don't ever do. And so I had the luxury of traveling with and being with, sales reps all across the Prairie region one summer when I was on the antique truck. And by the end of the summer, I had the book filled up, and, it was equally valuable, right?
Yeah.
To your point, equally
Absolutely.
valuable. What I will do was as important and equally valuable as here are all the things I won't do, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
But it was for sure helpful. Yeah.
George, what advice would you give to your 25-year-old self?
I would say the following. I was lucky enough early on to go to a leadership program through the company. And, I would say probably 95% of people, I had this developmental plan, and it was focused in on all the things that I was not, I had the opportunity to improve upon. So that was the plan. I went to this course. Here's the things I'm going to be working on. And I was lucky enough to have, top-notch leader for a day by myself. And when I was leaving, he said to me something that I never forgot. He said, the key to success is building off your strengths, recognizing your weaknesses, and surrounding people that have strengths where you are not strong. Now, you got to have a certain level of competency, but he said, if you're going to spend all your time, energy on things that you're not good at, he said, that's a big mistake. And I thought to myself, not crazy complicated, but I thought for me, it was like, oh boy, what a big insight. And so, I've taken that.
I think that's a great answer, right? So just double down almost on your strengths. Then you have to be aware of what your blind spots are for sure, but double down on your strengths, because we enjoy doing things that we're pretty good at, right?
Yeah, I would say patience. I got some coasters at Christmas time, and they say on the front of them, I tested for patience, and I tested negative. So it's for sure it's still an issue for me. I would just say patience is an issue.
Yeah.
And,
Wow.
Sometimes I would probably say in retrospect, especially early on, I would say I needed to be more patient and a better listener. Because, as you know, I was a hard driver, and perhaps on some occasions to a bit of a fault.
Well, I love how you go down this journey of self-awareness, because it's I think sometimes we're a little more critical of ourselves than others see us, and I loved how hard of a driver you were. But again, it's good that you know kind of who you are. I got two questions for you, because you've been more than generous with your time. So two more questions. One is, looking at this amazing career you've had and kind of everything you've done, all the leadership roles and whatnot, when people are talking about George Croft and his legacy, What do you hope that they say?
Yeah, so legacy is an interesting question because it certainly bridges beyond work, but I'll stay with work. Yeah, I would hope that people would say he was a straight shooter, that he was an honest guy, not always necessarily right. Black and white is probably, gray was never a great color for me. And I would hope some people would say, he had a bit of an impact on my career in a positive way. Because at the end of the day, I think companies go on and companies change hands, but the relationships that you've developed and the people that you've gotten to know, that's a currency. Like if you said to me now, what's most important through your career? I mean, there was lots of important stuff, and there's some stuff that was important because it was financially important. But for me, I would say for sure it's all about the people that you've had the opportunity to meet and interact with in the journey along the way. I mean, that for me, those are the special moments for sure.
I love that. So many times when I ask that question, people always say, when you ask anybody when they leave a company, sure, they loved the company, but it's always the people they miss the most.
Yeah, and it's funny because, sometimes you leave under good circumstances and then others perhaps you don't leave under ideal circumstances. I've had both. And it's funny, those that you thought you cared about and they cared about you, some of those people just disappeared off the face of the earth.
Sure.
And other people that you knew and you cared about, but you weren't quite as tight. They surprised you because they were the people that reached out for no other reason than to say, so how are you doing?
Yeah.
I think, that interaction, that human interaction, it's why I'm a big fan of, you got to find time to spend with people. I can't develop a relationship with Jason Taylor through text messaging. And people may say, oh, you're old fashioned and that's the way it is. Maybe it is, but my sense is that I've got to be able to spend time with you so that we can get to know each other. Like it's just, it's impossible to do that if I don't spend quality time getting to know who you are.
I love that. I love that. George, last question before I let you get back to your day, and that would be this. What one belief or principle do you have that you'll never compromise on?
One, so now I want to change the rules and do two. So we're just gonna change the rules, and I'm gonna go with two. I would say, like people, like there's lots of times people talk about, this process improvement, that process improvement. Don't get me wrong. I think process improvement is really important. This one's not going to surprise you because I've said it a bunch. People, people, people. Like it is the magic sauce. That is it. If you want to be successful, you want your company to be successful, it's all about the people, right people in right roles. That's what it's all about. And the second one for me is persistence. And persistence for me is about this commitment to win. Just got to get it over the finish line, irregardless of what's in the way. I used to say to people, nobody paid me to show up with a bunch of problems.
Yeah.
I never thought that. I always thought, I'm being paid to solve problems. That's what I'm being paid for, right? And, even if they were not the most ideal choices, I always thought about, okay, how do I actually get this done?
With that, George, I want to thank you, and I want to just close by saying this. Listen, I've had the privilege of having you lead me and having been on some of your teams, and all I can say is keep doing what you're doing because you do make a difference in people's lives. You made a difference in my life, and you're excellent at what you do. People want to follow you, and to my point earlier, people remember some of the best leaders they've had, and they remember some of the worst leaders they've had. And when I remember you, I think of you as one of the best leaders I've had. So thank you for being on the podcast. I really appreciate your time. You were gracious with it today, and I wish you nothing but the best.
Yeah, well, those are very nice complimentary comments. I really appreciate that, and look right back at you because I think it is that. It is about complimentary sort of caring and giving. So it was my pleasure, obviously, to get to know you as a younger gentleman, and I couldn't be more thrilled with the work that you're doing, the impact you're having on people's lives. So congratulations on all your success.
Appreciate it, George. Thanks so much.